My mom was a horrible addict. She barely took care of me as a kid. One night, my mom and I were on a car ride. I was around 6 or 7 at the time. I wasn't sure why we were driving, but it was late at night. There weren't many cars on the street, and I was sleeping in the back seat. I don't even remember getting into the car. My mom drove to some sketchy house and left me in the car for what felt like forever. Suddenly, the car door swung open, and someone violently grabbed me by my arm and yanked me out. I started screaming and crying until the man looked into my eyes and said, "Be quiet and don't try to run, or else I'll kill you." He had a scruffy beard and looked like a madman. I was scared to death, so I listened. He held me tight by my arm, shut the car door, and walked with me down the street. I looked back at the house my mom was in, hoping that she would come out at the last second to save me. I gazed at the house as long as possible while the man dragged me further away. As we walked down the street, I wanted to cry but was in shock and fear. If I sniffled or cried, he tightened his grip and yelled at me. The fear and confusion was overwhelming. We walked for a little while and ended up in the projects, a cluster of buildings crammed together in a rundown neighborhood. We entered one of these buildings and ascended a flight of stairs. My legs and feet hurt terribly. Fear kept me moving. Ascending another flight of stairs, I saw some random guy smoking a cigarette in the stairway, when suddenly, without warning, the kidnapper fell to the ground. Before I could comprehend what happened next, Cigarette Guy began punching and kicking him relentlessly in his head and face until he lay motionless on the ground before being thrown down the stairs by Cigarette Guy. You have no idea how scary and violent it is to see an unconscious man fall down the stairs. I'm afraid of falling downstairs even now. He bled everywhere. I still have no idea how the Cigarette Guy knew to help me. Maybe he could see tears in my eyes. Maybe he just picked up on something and had a bad vibe, but he acted instantly. The first second he could, he attacked my would-be kidnapper. The Cigarette Guy starts pacing back and forth while swearing at himself, gritting his teeth and clenching his fists. I thought he was mad at me, so I started crying. He looked at me and said, "Okay, okay, okay, shut up, shut up." He had an attitude, so I listened to him out of fear. The Cigarette Guy frightened me, but not as much as the bearded guy did. He started to ask me questions with an attitude. "Why are you out this late? Where are your parents? Why would you talk to strangers?" I was in shock and confusion. I couldn't answer the man's questions correctly. He asked if I knew my way home, and I told him I didn't. I told him a broken story about what happened, and somehow, with the information I gave him, he knew where my mom's car was. The only thing I remember about the road is passing a house with Christmas lights, despite Christmas being over. He knew the area well enough and figured out where I needed to go from that information. He promised to take me back if I vowed not to report to the police that I saw him or anyone who resembled him. He had an attitude. At that point, I didn't care what he asked me. I just wanted to go back to my mom, so I agreed. I followed him down the stairs. The bearded guy was still lying on the ground, bleeding, at the bottom of the stairs. He wasn't moving at all. For all I knew, he was dead, and I hope now that he is. The Cigarette Guy stepped over the bearded guy, and I followed. We walked outside, and the Cigarette Guy looked around panicky. I remember him saying, "The police don't like me." We walked out of the project building. My feet still hurt. The Cigarette Guy was walking fast in a panic, and I had to jog to keep up with him. I started crying, and he asked what was wrong. I told him my feet hurt, and I remember him sucking his teeth and picking me up with an attitude. He awkwardly cradled me in both arms. He walked down the road for a moment. Then I remember him swearing and running behind a house or a building. A cop car was driving down the road. He put me down and told me to run to the police car. I tried to run, but my legs could barely move. I was scared. The cop car kept driving and rode away without seeing me. I could not even get remotely close to it. He kept swearing to himself as he picked me up again and ran down the street. He took me behind houses and hid from every cop car driving by. I assume now that the police are looking for me. He carried me in both arms, running fast down the road. My mom was surrounded by police when I caught a glimpse of her and her car in the distance. The cigarette guy put me down and told me to run to the police. I got so excited that the pain in my legs disappeared. He put me down and ran away. I ran towards the police and my mom. My mom picked me up and hugged me tight. The police started to ask me and my mom questions. I don't remember much about their questions. I remember my mom telling the police some convoluted story that didn't make sense. She told me not to say anything, and I didn't say much but cried a whole bunch. We went home. Days later, my dad picked me up and knew something was wrong. I told him everything. I never lived with my mom again. When I grew up, I had time to think about that day and how I never forgave my mother. Not too long ago, I asked my dad what he remembered about the situation, and he told me what he thought happened from what I explained to him years ago. He said my mom was on a drug binge, I got kidnapped, and someone saved me, but the person who saved me had warrants and wasn't mad at me. He was just frustrated with the situation that he had to deal with. Imagine being a criminal on the run, and now you have a kidnapped girl with you, and you just beat a guy up half to death. If he had gotten caught with me, he could be in jail for my kidnapping. With my mom lying and me being in shock and confused, I wouldn't be able to tell them that the cigarette guy helped me, because, while it was all happening, I didn't even notice he was helping me. To the man who saved me, thank you.